the Lord Mayor referred to the title of this programme, It Seems History is to Blame, which is a line taken from James Joyce's book Ulysses. And today is Joyce's birthday, the 2nd of February. And I'm delighted that Professor COLBERT KEARNEY, Emeritus Professor in UCC, is going to read a couple of relevant passages now from Ulysses. So would you please welcome COLBERT KEARNEY.
Thank you, Liam, and thank you for the invitation to be here. The Lord Mayor spoke about the inclusivity of this series. Well, there's no greater proof of the inclusivity of this series than to have Joyce here, because Joyce is, for the future events, is almost entirely irrelevant, inasmuch as that his attitudes to the main strands which inspired Irish history, during the period that will be spoken about, was the opposite. Again, as to why this happened, there's no great explanation. It's partly to do with, of course, his Cork father, who was an ardent Parnellite. And it seems that with the fall of Parnell and the loss of that tradition, he lost interest in politics as an ongoing thing. And Joyce, his son, inherited this. Also the fact that he was, for some reason nobody can explain, extraordinarily kind of self-centered and self-driven, and had a sense of freedom beyond anything that people were dreaming about in Ireland at the time. But rather than get kind of sucked into an old kind of lecture, first of all, what I'm trying to do in the beginning is to show how alien he was to all of the major strands of Irish political and social development in the beginning. That notion of history. History for him was a nightmare. For many of the others, of course, the nationalists and the socialists, history was a kind of a dream that they would fulfill eventually. But for Joyce, it was a nightmare. And he, in a famous passage in The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, he's with the character called Davin, who is an extreme nationalist and a revivalist, which was the dominant in what was UCD at the time. And Stephen, the Joyce character, is not. Stephen says, "This race and this country and this life produced me," he said. "I shall express myself as I am." "Oh, try to be one of us," repeated Davin. "In your heart you are an Irishman, but your pride is too powerful." "My ancestors," the Stephen said, "threw off their language and took another. They allowed a handful of foreigners to subject them. Do you fancy I am going to pay in my own life and person debts they made? What for? For our freedom," said Davin. "Stephen, no honourable and sincere man has given up to you his life and his youth and his affections from the days of Tone to those of Parnell, but you sold him to the enemy, or failed him in need, or reviled him and left him for another. And you invite me to be one of you? I'll see you damned first. They died for their ideals, Stevie," says Davin. "Our day will come yet, believe me. So chucky our law foes." Stephen, following his own thought, was silent for an instant. "The soul is born," he said vaguely, "first in those moments I told you of. It has a slow and dark birth, more mysterious than the birth of the body. When the soul of a man is born in this country, there are nets flung at it to hold it back from flight. You talk to me of nationality, language, religion. I shall try to fly by those nets." So the image is from bird catching. So the soul is like a bird achieving its flight and freedom. But in Ireland, the culture as it throws a net. And these nets are nationality, language, and religion, which are the main forces which will inspire many of the people who will be dealt with in future events here. But for Stephen, it was something to escape. History, in that sense, was the nightmare from which he was trying to escape. He had a strong sense of his own desire for freedom, absolute freedom, free thought. He says in Ulysses, in the opening chapter, "You behold in me," Stephen said, with a grim displeasure, "a horrible example of free thought." So he felt that he had been born in servitude and aspired towards free thought. "I am the servant of two masters," Stephen said, "in English and in Italian." "Italian," says the English guest, a crazed queen, old and jealous, kneel down before me. "And a third," Stephen says, "there is, who wants me for odd jobs." So this is in Imperial Britain. Ireland is part of Imperial Britain. Ireland is also part of what Joyce sees as the Imperial Roman Catholic Church. And there is a third who wants me for odd jobs. This would be Mother Ireland, but kind of not seen as not seen in the way of the Aisling, but seen, recognised by Stephen as an old woman who comes in to delivering milk to the Martello Tower. And he says, kind of a wandering crone, lowly form of an immortal, serving her conqueror and her gay betrayer. So he sees this woman because Steve, probably because he is so short-sighted, he sees very little kind of in sharp outline out there, you know. So he easily kind of symbolizes things, turns actuality into symbols. And then he says, to serve or to upbraid, whether he could not tell, but scorned to beg her favour. So he will not serve anybody. And then in Mr. Deasy's school, he makes the famous announcement that history is a nightmare. The entire chapter is to do with history. He's been teaching history in this school. The whole place is full of kind of historical records, you know. And then, but history, Stephen says, is a nightmare from which I am to awake. So there is, the Stephen, the young Joyce, who is alienated or alienates himself from all of the major strands of Irish social, political and cultural life that will drive the revolutionary phase, you know. And yet in some extraordinary way, he may have been, so to speak, ahead of his time in choosing the central mature character of his book, a Jew, an immigrant. Well, he's not an immigrant himself, but his father was an immigrant. And in that kind of extraordinary chapter dealing with nation and nationhood, where Bloom, characteristically on an act of kindness, because he's not a boozer, he's not a drinker, he's not one of us, he's not a hearty lad, he goes into a fairly kind of rough pub, which is dominated by an extreme nationalist who believes that all good things are Irish, including kind of Shakespeare, Dante, Galileo, all of these people, they are good, therefore they're Irish. If Irish, therefore good. If good, therefore Irish. Bloom they loathe as a Jew, as an unvirile man, constant kind of snide remarks about his virility. When it is pointed out that he has children, the citizen says, who does he suspect? Like that, you know. And he, Bloom, but has a kind of a strength that he, and he's willing to stand up to these people in, I think, probably a non-Irish way. And this is narrated by one of the boozers, one of the hard men there, and one of the great storytellers of all time. So Bloom was talking with John Wise, and he quite excited with his dun-duckety mud-coloured mug on him and his old plum eyes rolling about. So he doesn't have an Irish complexion, that beautiful, mottled, freckled complexion that we all share, you know. But he's kind of rather sallow, and this is turned into, you know, dun-duckety mud-coloured mug on him and his old plum's eyes. But he had his large kind of dark eyes, and like your typical Celt, you know. So persecution, this is Bloom speaking, persecution. All the history of the world is full of it, as of course a Jew will be only too aware. Perpetuating national hatred among nations, you know. But do you know what a nation means? Asks John Wise. Yes, says Bloom. What is it? Says John Wise. A nation? A nation is the same people living in the same place. Oh, be goddamn, says Ned, laughing. If that's so, I'm a nation, for I'm living at the same place for the past 5 years. So, of course, everybody had a laugh at Bloom, and says he, trying to muck out of it, or living in different places. But that covers my case, says Joe. What is your nation, if I may ask, says the citizen. Ireland, says Bloom. I was born here, Ireland. And of course he's eventually kind of, you know, driven out of the pub as the row erupts, because Bloom makes the outrageous kind of observation that Jesus was a Jew. And the nationalist citizen says, by Jesus, you know, I'll kill you for taking the holy name in vain, and such ironies like that. But as the Lord Mayor kind of pointed out, at this stage, as it were, having been in a direct sense, irrelevant to the actual politics and of all shades in Ireland for many, many years, it would now seem, as it were, kind of almost a century after the publication of Ulysses, that a new interest comes in, is that we are no longer, as it were, largely or overwhelmingly an emigrant country, we're also an immigrant country. So now we are dealing, as it were, with many, many Blooms who have kind of come among us. And as I would like to think that today, that we would take a more bloom-like view of this than perhaps, some of our ancestors would have taken in the past. So thank you very much.
I want to thank all of the library staff who were involved in this process. Many of them are here today. I have to say I'm heartened by the wealth of ideas and enthusiasm that's coming from staff regarding this whole process, and I'm very confident that we'll be able to sustain it over the 10-year period. So thanks to everyone for coming. Thanks to you, Lord Mayor, for your inspiring and heartening words. And there are some refreshments here which everyone is more than welcome to take part in. So thanks again.